630 WMAL. I want to bring in a guest. His name is Derryck Green. He's getting his ministerial doctorate right now. He's a black gentleman, African American, and we'll ask him how he prefers to be addressed in that way. But I'm looking at a copy of an article he wrote. It was printed this week in Real Clear Politics. It says, "Help me. I'm suffering from acute race fatigue. After gavel-to-gavel coverage of the George Zimmerman trial, I need a break. I'm exhausted. And after watching President Obama liken himself to Trayvon Martin, I've had enough." Well, I'm not going to read the whole article right now. Let's bring our guest in, Derryck Green. Derryck, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Now, let me tell people a little bit more about you as well. You are a member of the National Advisory Council of the Project 21 Black Leadership Network. You've got your master's in theology from Fuller Theological Seminary, and you're currently pursuing your doctorate in the ministry at Azusa Pacific University. And you may have some other things that you want to tell people about yourself. Would you do that?
Sure. That pretty much sums it up. I mean, that's what I'm doing right now. Studying theology and ministry at Azusa Pacific, like you mentioned. And one of the things that I like to do is to kind of keep a pulse on what's going on culturally in America, whether it's relating to politics, whether it's relating to religion, or simply just cultural matters such as the Trayvon Martin incident and what's come from that particular episode. And I try to get different perspectives on what's going on, but I try to discuss it in a way that kind of doesn't involve a lot of hyperbole, doesn't involve a lot of over-emotionalism, but trying to stick with the facts and the logic of each incident so, I can kind of foster respectable dialogue of the people who choose to join in.
And I couldn't agree with you more about the importance of that, because part of the problem is people take differing positions and then they just scream at each other rather than trying to talk through them. And I thought your article here, and I've read some of the other things that you've written, is very thoughtful and very well done. And frankly, you've got a credibility, being black and I being white, you've got a credibility on this issue that some people will never afford to me. I don't know why somebody should be disqualified from addressing an issue because they're male and only women can talk about that, or because if you're not black, you don't have enough understanding to talk about it. That seems to go to the core of the problem.
It does, and that's one of the things that when people usually use that particular argument, my first reaction is that truth is truth regardless of the color of the person that it comes from. So the truth obviously should bear out first, but second of all, the logic in and of itself doesn't make sense. I've never taken drugs, but with my own two eyes and common sense and anecdotal experience, I know that drugs are bad. So I don't have to have used or abused drugs to know that they have a detrimental effect upon the human body. So when people usually say that, I say, well, let's think of it this way. And sometimes people agree and sometimes people don't. And it's generally when they do not agree with that form of argumentation, they usually have some sort of agenda to push, and that's unfortunate.
And most people, our guest is Derryck Green of Project 21, most people are totally unaware of what is happening right now with the agenda which relates to minorities, it relates to sex, it relates to race, and it relates to redistribution. But by promoting the concept of victimhood, the Obama administration has a lot of things that are coming out saying if something has disparate treatment, if it means that blacks don't get as many loans, or they don't get as many jobs, or they don't live in as nice a homes, they presume it is because of racial bias and hatred. Rather than someone saying, look, we can prove that you redlined an area or discriminated against somebody because of their race, they presume if everything is not proportioned and given out in equal proportions to each race, it's got to be discrimination. And that is a hidden agenda in the administration that's going to be bubbling up in a few months. And it links up with what you're saying in this article and elsewhere about the whole philosophy of being victims. That seems to me a very destructive philosophy.
It is. It's a very, very destructive philosophy, and it's no matter which segment or which demographic, gloms on to the victimhood narrative, it's particularly destructive to the black community, because what it says is everything bad that has happened to me, or because things that didn't happen to me as well as I wanted them to, or as well as that they happened to somebody else, it's automatically due to racism, and it automatically excludes a lack of preparation, a lack of self-sacrifice, or a lack of determination as to why they did not achieve a particular or desired result. So the victimhood narrative, what it ultimately does is it keeps black people paralyzed and dependent upon external help, be it the government or be it white America. And when you're dependent upon somebody else for your success, you in essence, you are a victim, but you'll never achieve the level of success or the desired result if you automatically exclude personal responsibility in the matter. And I think the victimhood narrative in black America has paralyzed black America since the mid-1960s. And as a direct result of that, we're, as a community, reaping what we've sown.
And I want to, let me first remind people, this is Derryck Green as our guest, and our call-in number is 1-888-630-WMAL. That's 630-9625. I want you to listen, Derryck, to the statement that President Obama gave a couple of weeks ago and get your response to it. This was after the jury verdict in the George Zimmerman trial for the death of Trayvon Martin.
When Trayvon Martin was first shot, I said that this could have been my son. Another way of saying that is Trayvon Martin could have been me 35 years ago. When you think about why, in the African American community at least, there's a lot of pain around what happened here, I think it's important to recognize that the African American community is looking at this issue through a set of experiences and a history that doesn't go away. There are very few African American men in this country who haven't had the experience of being followed when they were shopping in a department store. That includes me. There are very few African American men who haven't had the experience of walking across the street and hearing the locks click on the doors of cars.
Derryck Green, you've grown up in that circumstance. Is that your experience, and how does it compare with the president's?
Well, I've had similar experiences, but what I would love to say to the president is the same thing that I said about the Trayvon Martin incident, since last February, is that the reason that there is a higher level of suspicion regarding black males is because, unfortunately, black males commit a disproportionate amount of violent crime. Trayvon Martin was just as much a victim of George Zimmerman's gun that night as he was of the 8 previous burglars who burglarized the retreat at Twin Lakes down there in Florida. So the reason he was followed is because he fit a criminal profile, not a racial profile. When the president says, yes, this has happened to me, and again, it's happened to me as well, not because of anything inherently to who I am or what I've done, but because, unfortunately, there's been a precedent that has been set by black males and delinquent behavior. If we want to eradicate this type of feeling, doors locking or women grabbing their purse while they're in the elevator, then we're going to have a wholesale cultural shift amongst black America to try to gear black males, young black males, away from violent and detrimental self-defeating behavior. That's when the entire ethos will change, but we can't just automatically say that this happens and there's no reason for it whatsoever, aside from the fact that these young men are black.
Well, what was, you mentioned the criminal profile, and few people have talked about this. What were the common elements of the suspects for the 8 burglaries in that edition that preceded the occasion the night there with Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman? What was the common description of each of those who performed the 8 break-ins?
Well, they all fit the same. They all had the same build. They all shared the same color of skin. They were all young black males. And based off of, the testimony of George Zimmerman and comparing that to the police reports, he was acting suspicious. And In the testimony, they said young black males were the ones who were burglarizing that particular neighborhood. So because of his height, his weight, his build, and his color, he fit that criminal profile. And again, as the evidence came out during the trial, whether people read it in the transcript or actually watched the trial, they know for certain that George Zimmerman did not follow Trayvon Martin specifically because he was black.
So in this occasion, I mean, this whole thing, and you mentioned what's been happening with the Al Sharptons, if you will. I don't think maybe I shouldn't say the Al Sharptons. There's only one Al Sharpton. But why do we have these persons treated as leaders of the black community? And does the black community really listen to them? And if so, what does that tell us about that community?
Al Sharpton, he's emblematic of what you're speaking of. And, I don't think that black America sees Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson as, their quote-unquote leaders. I think that there was a time where Jesse Jackson was seen as a leader, but I think that his moral credibility kind of undermined that. So I don't think that black Americans think of those two as leaders. Now, that said, I think there is a certain segment of black America, primarily the underclass, that sees those two gentlemen as their leaders. But by and large, from my experience, it seems like white progressives who have an agenda to maintain racial strife projects these two gentlemen in other, quote-unquote leaders or quote-unquote ministers that fit that particular perspective. They foster that upon black America to say that these people represent the monolithic thought that's in black America. And I think that's one reason why Project 21 is so important, is because the men and women that participate in Project 21 are out to show that, one, there is no monolithic thought pattern or behavioral pattern in the black community, but two, this is contrary to what is normally seen as that monolithic behavior.
Oh, how about the black leadership? Let's take the NAACP and what they do on pushing their particular agenda. We had a guest on shortly talking about the agenda of the so-called transgender agenda. And I'm looking here at a statement given by Benjamin Jealous, head of the NAACP, this June, saying that one reason to oppose voter ID laws is because to protect the rights of transgendered individuals, that is, people who dress and behave differently than their biological sex. And as he said in that, if you show your ID to vote, you look like two different people because one may be male in appearance and the other may be female. And therefore, he says, that's one reason why the NAACP opposes voter ID laws. You see the direction of what's happening with so-called black leaders that you are trying to tell people about.
Right, and it's interesting, coincidentally, I wrote a blog piece for Project 21 on that very issue. And one of the things that I've said is that, black leadership, as it's commonly been understood, is just as much as a euphemism as a woman's right to choose or choice or anything like that, because it doesn't mean anything anymore. If the NAACP is out there saying that we cannot have voter ID laws to reduce the amount of corruption at the ballot box simply because a minuscule percentage of the population may be disenfranchised, it shows how profoundly unserious that the NAACP has become. It's interesting. The NAACP just 2 months ago filed a lawsuit in conjunction with the ACLU to try to stop a law in the state of Arizona that would reduce the numbers of race and sex-based abortions. They came out with the ACLU trying to have this law overturned. I think it was called the Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass Prenatal Act, to try to have this law overturned because it says that the law, discriminates against black women and Asian women. Now, considering that the numbers of abortions or the rates of abortion are disproportionately high in the black community, upwards, I think, of 40% of all abortions happen in the black community, it's very, very odd that a so-called civil rights organization would be suing to have that number increase, but yet and still they're there in conjunction with the ACLU trying to have that law overturned. So when you see the NAACP standing for abortion, when they're standing for, against, I should say, voter ID laws because of transgendered Americans, when you see the NAACP fighting against school choice, when you see them supporting gay marriage, as opposed to maybe supporting marriage in the black community, maybe having programs that are targeting blacks to encourage marriage, to encourage blacks to not only marry, but to have children in the bounds of wedlock. We see a so-called civil rights organization taking steps that is almost diametrically opposed to the benefits of its constituents. You have to say that they're no longer a civil rights organization. They're just a progressive, organization that's trying to go out and advance a politically progressive message. And they should change their charter. They should change their 501c3 status and just become a progressive political organization, because they don't represent what's in the best interest of black Americans anymore.
Yeah. So, Derryck, can you